This is my ranking of games where you start with nothing that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how strong the survival or progression loop feels from 0 to build-up. Let's get straight into the list. This war of mine dropped me into a ruined city where every can of food, bandage, and piece of wood felt important because the people in my shelter could easily get sick, depressed, or killed. I liked how scavenging at night felt risky since a single mistake could ruin an entire run. Stealing from innocent people made me feel guilty, but sometimes I still did it because survival became desperate. The atmosphere stayed heavy through the entire experience, especially when characters reacted emotionally after terrible choices. I also liked that the game never treated me like a hero and instead showed how civilians suffer during war. Even after many hours, the pressure of surviving never disappeared. Shelter upgrades always felt rewarding after difficult nights. Harsh winters and constant shortages made survival feel throughout. This easily belongs in my masterpiece tier. Kenshi put me into a brutal world where almost everything could beat me in a fight, steal my food, or leave me bleeding in the desert. I started with nothing, got beaten by random enemies constantly, and spent a huge amount of time just trying to survive long enough to improve basic skills. What made the experience special was how failure actually helped progression, because injuries slowly made my characters tougher over time. I liked building a small group, exploring dangerous regions, and watching weak survivors slowly become capable fighters and workers. The world never guided me toward a specific goal, which made every discovery feel personal and unpredictable. Few games make survival and growth feel this rewarding. Even painful defeats became rewarding after enough progress and planning. Kenshi earns a clear spot in my masterpiece tier in this ranking. Medieval Dynasty began with me alone in the wilderness, carrying basic tools, little food, and almost no protection from weather or animals. I spent my early hours hunting, collecting sticks, crafting simple shelters, and trying to survive through changing seasons, while slowly understanding how the village systems worked. What I liked most was watching a tiny settlement slowly grow into a functioning community with farms, workers, and production chains that handled tasks automatically. The progression felt relaxing without becoming completely mindless because resources still mattered during expansion. I also enjoyed how everyday activities like farming, cooking, and gathering became part of a satisfying routine over time. Building a stable village after struggling alone in the beginning felt rewarding every single time. Seasonal changes also kept survival interesting during longer sessions during difficult winters. This lands nicely inside my great tier. Underrail started me off as a weak survivor trapped in dangerous underground stations where almost every enemy felt stronger and better equipped than I was. Resources stayed limited during the early hours, so every bullet, healing item, and crafting material mattered while exploring abandoned tunnels and hostile settlements. I liked how combat forced me to think carefully about positioning, traps, and ability usage because reckless decisions usually ended badly. The world also felt isolated and oppressive in a way that made exploration tense throughout the experience. Character builds added a huge amount of variety, especially once I understood how different skills affected combat and dialogue options. Progress came slowly, but surviving difficult encounters after struggling for hours felt satisfying each time. The soundtrack also strengthened the lonely atmosphere during exploration sections. This game deserves its place in my excellent tier. Battle Brothers started with a small group of weak mercenaries carrying terrible equipment, low morale, and barely enough money to survive another contract. I spent a huge amount of time managing injuries, replacing dead soldiers, and deciding whether risky battles were worth taking for extra crowns and loot. What made the experience memorable was how attached I became to random recruits who slowly turned into skilled fighters after surviving brutal encounters. Losing experienced characters during difficult fights hurt badly because rebuilding the company took real effort and time. I also liked how better armor and weapons completely changed the strength of my group after rough beginnings. Random events between contracts helped the mercenary company feel alive. The tactical combat stayed challenging even after many hours because mistakes could destroy entire runs quickly. Battle Brothers settles strongly into my excellent tier. Outward dropped me into a harsh fantasy world where even basic travel felt dangerous because hunger, weather, sickness, and enemy ambushes constantly slowed my progress. I started weak, poor, and unprepared, which made every successful journey feel meaningful after struggling through long roads and difficult fights. I liked how exploration worked without excessive map markers since discovering hidden locations felt more natural and rewarding. Survival mechanics also played a huge role, because preparing food, managing supplies, and carrying proper gear became necessary before traveling into dangerous areas. Combat felt awkward at first, but learning enemy patterns and experimenting with different builds slowly made battles more manageable. Careful preparation before expeditions usually mattered more than reckless fighting strategies. Playing cooperatively with another player also created some really memorable moments during difficult expeditions. This adventure fits very well within my excellent tier. Kingdom Come Deliverance began with me as an ordinary villager who could barely fight properly, read books, or survive difficult battles against trained soldiers. The early hours felt rough because even simple fights became dangerous when my character lacked skill, stamina, and decent equipment. What made the progression satisfying was slowly learning combat mechanics while watching my character improve through practice instead of instant upgrades. I also liked how the world felt believable with detailed towns, realistic routines, and quests that often allowed different solutions depending on my choices. Stealing, lockpicking, and surviving dangerous encounters felt tense because mistakes carried real consequences throughout the experience. Becoming capable after struggling badly in the beginning created a rewarding sense of growth that stayed memorable for many hours. Exploring forests strengthened the grounded medieval atmosphere considerably. This stands proudly in my masterpiece tier. Ancestors, the Humankind Odyssey placed me into a dangerous jungle where survival depended on slowly learning mechanics through experimentation instead of constant tutorials or direct instructions. I started as a weak primate struggling against predators, unfamiliar terrain, and basic survival needs while trying to guide my clan through evolution. What made the experience interesting was discovering new actions and behaviors naturally over time because almost everything required curiosity and patience. Exploring forests, rivers, and caves felt tense during the early hours, since a single mistake could easily kill members of the group. I also liked how progression focused on intelligence, adaptation, and generational growth rather than traditional leveling systems. Watching my clan slowly improve after repeated failures made survival feel rewarding despite the confusing beginning. This game earns its place in my great tier. Bellwright started with me surviving alone in the wilderness while gathering resources, crafting tools, and slowly building a small settlement from almost nothing. The early progression felt satisfying because every structure, villager, and upgrade made the camp feel more alive and functional after struggling through basic survival. I liked recruiting people and assigning different jobs, since watching the settlement grow into a defended community created a rewarding sense of progress over time. Combat and crafting systems also worked well together because exploring dangerous areas often provided useful materials and equipment for expansion. Some parts still felt unfinished, especially with certain AI behaviors and slower progression systems, but the survival loop stayed enjoyable through most of my experience. Building a larger settlement after difficult beginnings remained the strongest part of the game. I ended up placing this in my good tier. The Age of Decadence placed me into a brutal world where weak characters could easily die during fights, failed negotiations, or dangerous political situations. I started with limited abilities and quickly realized that careless choices often created serious consequences that completely changed quests and faction relationships. What made the experience memorable was the freedom to solve problems through combat, persuasion, stealth, or diplomacy, depending on how I built my character. The world constantly reacted to decisions in ways that made progression feel personal instead of scripted. I also liked how non-combat builds remained useful because dialogue and intelligence could completely avoid difficult battles in certain situations. The systems felt harsh during the early hours, but surviving difficult scenarios after learning the mechanics became extremely satisfying later on. This deserves a respected place in my excellent tier. Wartales began with a struggling mercenary group carrying weak gear, limited food supplies, and barely enough money to survive another difficult contract. I spent much of the early game balancing wages, injuries, equipment repairs, and survival needs while traveling across dangerous regions filled with hostile enemies. What I liked most was watching the company slowly become stronger after recruiting better fighters, improving gear, and surviving difficult tactical battles. Exploration also stayed enjoyable, because contracts, ruins, and random encounters constantly pushed me toward new decisions and risks. The combat system gave enough flexibility to experiment with different strategies, especially during larger fights against stronger groups. Some systems became repetitive after long sessions, but the sense of progression remained satisfying through most of the experience. Wartales earns its position inside my great tier. Project Zomboid placed me into a zombie apocalypse where survival depended on learning routines, avoiding unnecessary risks, and accepting that death could happen at any moment. I started with weak combat skills, limited supplies, and almost no understanding of how dangerous simple mistakes could become after only a few days. What made the experience special was how ordinary tasks like finding food, boarding windows, and organizing storage slowly became important parts of survival. I also liked how tension never disappeared because even experienced characters could die quickly after one careless decision. Building safe houses and surviving longer runs felt rewarding since every successful day required planning and preparation. Multiplayer created even more unpredictable situations because other survivors sometimes became larger threats than the zombies themselves. This easily secures a place in my masterpiece tier. That's my ranking of games where you start with nothing. Some made the journey from weakness to survival feel incredibly rewarding, while others became frustrating whenever the grind or difficulty started slowing progression down. Thanks for watching.